Hi, everybody. We are going to go back into the Cold War and we're going to continue that discussion with more depth. We're going to go into President Truman's first incident in the Cold War and how he's going to handle that, and we'll see how this whole thing plays out. But by this point, hopefully, you've seen the Dr. Seuss cartoon, the Butter Battle book. It's a great one. It's very kind of silly, cheesy animation. Yes, it's not high definition, but it still gets the job done. Other than that, after you get that, hopefully you can see a little similarities between some of the overarching principles of the Cold War that we've talked about when we're talking about the arms race, right? The building up of weapons. We're talking about kind of this misunderstanding, this divide between the world that we can only see it our way and we can't allow that other side to exist. And really, this can get out of hand. It's trying to one up each other, one after the other after the other. So we are going to go into the Cold War today under President Truman, and we'll see where it takes us. Just a little general review. The Cold War. The Cold War is an era. It's not necessarily a war in and of itself. It contains a lot of other wars, but typically we mark the years 1945 to 1990. That C there just means it's circa, which is a Latin word, which means like sort of like around. So like around 1945 and around 1990. Not really like hard date because there is no real treaty or declaration of war because that's not how this war per se is going to actually work. We typically mark it from the end of World War II up until the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union does not exist today. The country of Russia does, but those are slightly different. The landmass in the country of the Soviet Union are different things. But the end of World War II, with the dropping of the atomic bomb, this kind of race for dominance and control of the world kind of begins almost instantaneously, and so we take off from there. Now, ultimately, this reason why we call it a Cold War, I've already shown you this slide before, but it never really heats up into real conflict or fighting. By that, I mean that it's not direct fighting between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. We are not sending our soldiers into Moscow. They're not sending their soldiers into New York City, right? It's not going to happen like that. We will have issues where we're going to have to do a lot of politicking back and forth, some peace agreements, hopefully, but also a lot of escalation is going to happen. We're going to be fighting what they call like kind of puppet wars. So we, right, won't be directly fighting them, but kind of our puppet might be South Korea or South Vietnam, and their puppet might be North Korea and North Vietnam. So we are supporting one side, they're supporting the other. So we're not directly fighting, we're more indirectly having these incidents. So this conflict is not going to be kind of tamed to one general area or one general country. This is going to be a global thing we're going to be fighting over. Our first issue that we're going to have in the Cold War is going to take us to Europe. And post World War II, Europe is going to be kind of left in shambles. The Allied powers are going to make some big decisions. And one of the biggest decisions they're going to have is they're going to decide to divide Germany into a couple different pieces. Now, if you look up in this map on the left, this represents the country of Germany, what's left of it after World War II. And so what the Allied powers, the UK, right, Britain, England, France, the United States of America, and the Soviet Union are all going to do is they're all going to divide it into fourths. Not perfect fourths, but fourths nonetheless. However, it's really splitting it up in between two different pieces. The red representing the Soviet Union, that represents the only government out of these four that is communist, that believes in socialism, that is actually practicing it as their government. The UK, France, and the United States of America on the west here are all going to be capitalistic, going to be more democratic. So I'm going to draw a little line here for you. This line is going to be the real dividing factor. Now, it is not a physical wall. There is no physical separation there, or geographical features separating them there. But what it does do is it really kind of sets up the stage for us for what we're going to be talking about today. So the Eastern German country is run by communists, basically run by the Soviets. The Western German side, the green, the orange, and the blue, is run by the remaining allies and remained free of communism, more democratic and capitalistic. The way I remember it, because I always think of it from an American point of view when we're talking about this, even though this isn't kind of the full story. The West is the best, East is the least. Oh, it rhymes. It doesn't really make perfect sense, but it rhymes, and so that kind of helps keep track of it. But this isn't the only story that we have here. Yes, we have Germany divided, but notice there's a little colorful blob right here inside of East Germany. That is the capital city of Germany. That's Berlin. So Berlin is embedded deep inside East Germany. Now, the other important thing to understand is Germany doesn't exist anymore. Germany ceases to exist. Now we have West Germany made up of this green zone, this orange zone, and this blue zone. That's West Germany. That's one separate country. Then there's another separate country called East Germany, represented here in this red zone. Now, inside of that, the city of Berlin is also divided, right? Is also divided into four pieces, but in reality, we know that there's kind of two. There is West Berlin and East Berlin. So it makes it even more complicated. All of the democratic capitalist side of Berlin is completely surrounded by the communist side, run by the Soviet Union. So as you can imagine, there might be some problems here in the very near future. So this is not a problem solely exclusively to Germany. It really kind of begins to show throughout all of Europe. There is a Western side and an Eastern side. There's a democratic capitalist side, and there's a socialist communist side. And that division is sometimes called the Iron Curtain. On one side of this line, you're going to see capitalism and democracy. On the other side, you're going to see communism, totalitarianism, like dictatorships, socialism. But it's not a physical divide. Right? This is not a physical wall. It's an analogy, right? It's a metaphor. So imagine that the curtains of your room were made out of iron. You couldn't see through them. You couldn't get around them. The other thing that really to take hold here is America really starts to view the Soviet Union and Stalin as like our new Hitler, our new Nazi Germany. They are this dangerous threat. We need to get rid of them. We need to find a way to stop these crazy people from trying to take over the world. That's our view of the Soviet Union and Stalin. And so because of that view, because we view him similar in the way that we view a Hitler, we're going to really take some drastic actions to prevent them from accomplishing this world domination that we believe that they desire. So this being our point of view, it's going to guide a lot of our decisions. So here we have America's very first policy of dealing with communism, and we're going to call that containment. Containment is trying to contain or keep communism where it is. Do not let it expand, right? We use containers all the time in our daily life. For example, if you ever bring your lunch to school or you take leftovers, they'll give you a container from a restaurant, or you have Tupperware at home that your parents will perhaps, or you put food in and you put in your bag and you bring it to school to eat for lunch. What is important to understand is our goal isn't to crush it, destroy, and get rid of it. Our goal at this point is just to keep it where it is. It will die out on its own. It will eventually go away. And we want to prevent what's happening down in this cartoon down here of Joseph Stalin creeping and taking over more and more land. We're trying to keep him where it is. And eventually this fanatic idea, hopefully from our point of view, will die out. Think of it like this, right? If you have a can of soup, right? And you pour it into a Tupperware container, and you close the lid and you put it in your bag, you're good. You can take it, it's fine. It's not going to be that big of a deal. But if you open up your backpack and say your mom or dad tries to pack your lunch for you, they open up the can of soup and they just pour it straight into your bag, you're going to be really upset. It's all over the place. We don't want that. We want it in a very confined, specific place. We want it in that container. So we are going to see containment practiced in a couple different ways. We can see it in an economic way, we can see it in a philosophical way, we can see it in a political way, a military. There's very different ends that we can look at this, but we're going to take a look at just a couple of them in the Truman administration. So the first thing that we can do is we can look at containment through politics. So President Truman is going to issue a doctrine. A doctrine is kind of like a declaration of your beliefs. So the Truman Doctrine is going to be this big statement of the American belief about what containment is or what communism is. President Truman, right after World War II, there's a year or two after World War II ends, so just exited the Second World War, this massive kind of death toll. And Truman offers U.S. assistance to any nation that is threatened by communism. If you're a democratic country or you want democracy and you feel threatened, right? Notice that key word there that he uses here, right? Threatened by communism, we will be there to help you. The United States of America will get involved. And that is going to start getting deeper into this story. right? We're going to see examples of where is America going to go. Look at this political cartoon up here. Where are we sending aid? Where are we sending money? To Greece and Turkey. We've never been to Greece and Turkey yet. Why would we go to those countries? Well, we're going to start to look at why. Another example that we can look at through containment is military aid. So, because we believe that the Soviets are trying to take over the world, we need to make some military alliances to protect ourselves in case something like this happens. And that's how an organization called NATO is born. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The the NATO alliance is going to begin a couple years after World War II, 4 years after World War II ends. And the whole goal is to provide security, right? Provide collective security. So everybody's going to protect each other. It's Western Europe, the United States of America, and Canada, along with Greece and Turkey. Now, this is important for a couple reasons. Number one, we now have a military alliance, so if something happens, we have a lot of military allies, good for us. But two, this is a huge change from like George Washington's farewell address that you may have talked about in like a US 1 class, or we're just talking about changes in general. We haven't really gotten to this huge kind of alliance system yet. We've seen other countries do it like in World War I and World War II, but not us. So this is a huge change. America after World War II is going to be propelled onto a world stage. We are going to try to dictate kind of the reshaping of the world. And it's not just those countries, but again, Greece and Turkey. Why those two? We're going to get there in just a second. Don't you worry. So this is a map of all of these different alliances throughout the world. There are alliances with Latin America, South America, Western Europe, the Middle East, Southeastern Asia, Australia, New Zealand, right? The Koreans, the Filipinos, right? We are all over the world right now creating alliances and treaties. We are trying to get them on our side because from our point of view in this conflict, you're either with us or you're against us. We're really trying to take over this idea of branching out and making these alliances and having them kind of rooted more collectively with us. Notice again down here, Greece and Turkey in these alliances. So one thing I really want to draw to your attention with Greece and Turkey right here is notice its geographic location, right? Look at where it is. It is right in the middle, right, of the edge of Europe, Asia, right? We have the Middle East right here, and then we can get right into Africa. So the belief is if we can control these two countries, we can prevent communism from spreading here. We can prevent communism from spreading here. And as a result, we can keep communism out of Africa and the rest of the Middle East down here. If we lose these two, it's kind of like a bridge. If you control the bridge, you control who goes through and who doesn't. So we can really, really kind of make a buffer zone or make a wall for ourselves, hopefully, by turning these countries to more democratic or capitalist countries and letting them fall to communism. So there's a lot of things at play here. It seems like random countries, but there's a reason for those two for sure. The last way that we're going to talk about containment is through economics. When we're talking about communism, communism is a system where everybody in the country is going to be taken care of. Every person is going to be given supplies as they need from the government in theoretical communism. The problem is this system of government is really, really good for people that are doing very poorly economically. Right? So think about it this way. If you and your sibling both have money, right? You have $10, your sibling has $2. What your parents may decide to do is they will take all of that money together. They're going to be the government, right? You don't own that money, but to keep everybody happy and give everybody what they need, they're going to take all of that money, those $12, your 10 in there too, and then they're going to divide it evenly about who needs what. So you don't need more money because you have more than enough, say, to go to like a midday movie, like a matinee. And they need a lot more. So they will give them some of that money and they will give you some of it. So say if we're keeping it totally even, they will have $6 at the end of this and you will have $6 at the end of this. You're going to be upset because you just lost money in that deal. They're going to be very happy because they just gained money in that deal. So one way that we're going to try to prevent communism from flipping in a lot of these countries is we are going to try to provide economic aid. We're going to provide money to help them rebuild. Now, understand that Europe is in a very, very shaky state right now, just coming out of the Second World War. What happened with the Italians and the Germans taking over and all of the war that happened between, a lot of things destroyed, a lot of deaths, a lot of rebuilding left to do. So they're not really in the best economic state like the United States is. We were kind of protected geographically because of the oceans, and we were able to fund the war. They were not so lucky, most people in mainland Europe. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to flood them with money to try to help them rebuild, give them a lot of loans to help them get back up on their feet. Hopefully, if they're doing in a good economic spot, they're not going to want to turn over to communism. This is just one of the many ways that we can help to hopefully influence what's happening or quell or stomp out any kind of communist movements popping up in these countries. What it's really going to look like, it's kind of going to look like, and if you have divorced parents, this really isn't true, and you know this because I had divorced parents, but what you will start to see is you're going to see examples of kind of like what divorced kids look like in movies where parents are just constantly buying them bigger and bigger and bigger gifts. We're going to give them a bunch of money, a bunch of aid, a bunch of support, and the Soviet Union's going to try to do the same thing, but we're going to be very, very successful at doing this in Western Europe. This is a good example of what I was just talking about on that last slide. Notice the countries we give the most money to: France and the United Kingdom, right? Look at this money right here. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. So the millions and millions of dollars you can see up here in this photo as well, right? The key up here in the map. The other thing to take note of is where's the rest of the money going? Greece, once again, right? Turkey down here as well, right? But notice the other countries we're giving it to: West Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, the countries right on the border with East Germany. We're trying to create a really good buffer zone from communism spreading. So it's not random what countries we give money to. We're going to give them to the countries we have the closest alliances with, right? The French, the UK, and even Italy down here as well, right? Trying to prevent from communism from squeaking in to or from Africa down here. We're kind of creating these buffer zones, and that's where we're funneling a lot of money. So notice we're doing things very calculated, very specific. This is going to help to bring about some of our very first problems. The Soviet Union, notice, the countries on the eastern side of Europe are not going to get that aid, right? So look at countries, right, here of like Poland, right, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, the Soviet Union. There is this almost gap. Nothing is being sent there. So they're going to be suffering heavily. These are countries mostly under the Soviet control. Sometimes we call these satellite nations, although they're not maybe directly a part of the Soviet Union. They kind of like think about how a satellite orbits the Earth. It's not directly part of the Earth, but sort of connected to it in a way. They're kind of connected there. And Stalin is going to refuse to accept any of this aid. He's going to create his own plan called the Molotov Plan. But the issue that we're going to start to see is we're going to see a huge amount of conflict in these areas. The reason why, for example, remember East Berlin shadowed around the entire side of East Germany, the communist side. There is going to be a lot of people that they're going to see all this money going to West Germany or the western side of the city, and they're going to try to flood into that new area. So what you're going to do is you are going to complete, if you're right a student in US2, you are going to complete the Berlin Airlift role play activity. So what you're going to do is I'm going to give you a couple different scenarios on the very first incident in the Cold War in Europe. I'm not too concerned with you getting it exactly right as happens in history. I'm not concerned about that. One thing I really want you to focus on is understanding the complexity. You're going to answer questions. Some questions that are lined in red, you're going to answer, right, WWSD. It's not going to be what would Jesus do, WWJD, WWSD. What would Stalin do? So what are you going to do if you're from the Soviet point of view? How are you going to view the American advances, right? And then you're going to flip it on the other side for some questions that are outlined in blue, WWTD, what would Truman do? So try to get the American point of view and the Soviet point of view on this very first incident. After you complete that, you can come back and finish this video, or you can finish it now for just a little bit more content, and then we're going to realize to kind of break down how this thing actually happens. So hopefully at this point, you are going to have already completed that Berlin Airlift activity, and that will kind of give you a good kind of basis for everything. Um, in 1948, the Soviet Union is going to start to respond to America's policy of containment. Um, the problem is a lot of different people are going to flood out of the communist side or the east side of Berlin, or east side of Germany or eastern side of Europe, and try to flood into these Western countries because there's a lot more money going there. There's a lot more economic aid, a lot more factory resurgences and business resurgences. So they're trying to get on that. In fear of losing all of their skilled workers and all of their people, what the Soviet Union is going to do is they are going to create a blockade. A blockade is where you block someone from doing something. You kind of make a wall, a makeshift wall, if you will. What they're going to do is they're going to shut all the gates going into West Berlin, or cutting out any traffic going into East Germany. So the problem is, if you remember from the map, we can't drive through East Germany if they've cut the gates, right? If we do try to force our way through there, that could be an act of war. That could start World War III right away. Do we really want to do that? Absolutely not. So what other choice do we have? How are we going to get aid to these people living in West Berlin? How are we going to get help to these citizens? And so what Truman is going to do is he's actually going to use his airplanes. He's going to use the new Air Force to send food, fuel, any supplies into West Berlin. Their bombers are not really going to be used. We're not going to attack the Soviet Union in any way. We're not going to use violence. What we're going to do is we're going to provide humanitarian aid. There's one pilot called the Candy Bomber, is what his nickname becomes, because he flies into West Berlin and even a little bit over East Berlin, and he drops like chocolate and candy and stuff like that for the children. But they'll airlift milk, they'll airlift gasoline, all of these things into the Western Berlin side. They're just literally going to fly right over the blockade. This whole thing is going to last for 9 months. Eventually, Stalin's going to back down. So we have our first scenario where we don't know what America's going to do when they set up this blockade. Are we going to bomb them? Are we going to invade? Are we going to force our way in? Are we going to back down to them? No one really knows how it's going to play out. But the important thing to realize is this very first incident stays cold. The Cold War does not heat up into actual violence. So we are going to go through it like this. You are going to see, right, this is a big picture of Germany, right? The green side is our side, the red side is the Soviet side. And we're literally going to fly airplanes into Berlin, which is this big black dot over here. Now, we're not going to be dropping bombs. Like I said, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be dropping food. We're going to be dropping help. It's going to look something like this, and you'll notice that coming out of this kind of cargo plane right here, you're going to see supplies coming in, dropping for children, citizens that need help, that are facing a little bit of economic depravity. And you're even going to see it in the sense where there's going to be a lot of different propaganda for this as well about why we're doing what we're doing, right? We drop milk on these people, not kind of loose milk. We're not opening up a gallon of milk and pouring out the airplane, but we're airlifting all of these supplies. The Cold War is going to stay cold for now. In the next video, we're going to go into Asia under Truman, but for now, we finished our discussions in Europe. Hopefully this helps. If you've got any questions, leave a comment in the section down below. See ya.